Multimedia Publishing Incorporated, Denver, Colorado, presents the Get Acquainted series, introducing authors and places in American literature. This unit, written by Paul Friesen, introduces three important political writers: Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and Abraham Lincoln. In this unit, you will learn the significant role that Franklin, Jefferson, and Lincoln played in America's struggle for independence, freedom, and equality, how they exerted a great deal of influence through the printed page, and how they were keenly dedicated to their fellow countrymen. Perhaps no individual in American literature and politics has left so great an influence as Benjamin Franklin. As a journalist, printer, public servant, scientist, inventor, diplomat, and religious philosopher, he enjoyed almost worldwide respect. His formal schooling was limited to less than 2 years, but he received honorary degrees from 7 universities. He mastered 6 languages and was recognized as one of the world's great scientists by 8 foreign governments. He was a member of 6 European Academies of Science. He was a brilliant conversationalist and a favorite among the ladies of high society. Franklin was born in this house in Boston in 1706, the 15th child of a candle maker and soap boiler. It was an obscure beginning, but in a true rags-to-riches fulfillment of the American dream, Franklin became wealthy and famous. In his autobiography, he boasted matter-of-factly, "From the poverty and obscurity in which I was born, and in which I passed my earliest years, I have raised myself to a state of affluence and some degree of celebrity in the world." From early childhood, Franklin excelled in reading and exhibited a flair for writing. At age 12, he was apprenticed to his brother James as a printer's assistant. His first published writing appeared anonymously in James' newspaper, the New England Courant. From this beginning, Franklin relied on his writing ability to communicate his ideas for the next 70 years. His writings are collected in these 17 volumes. Unhappy with the conditions of his apprenticeship, the general confinements of puritanical Boston, and the lack of freedom to pursue personal ambitions, Franklin ran away from home at the age of 17. He found his way to Philadelphia, where he obtained work in a print shop. 6 years later, he set up his own shop, concentrated on quality workmanship, and became the best printer in town. He soon had 3 major journalistic projects going: the Pennsylvania Gazette newspaper, the General Magazine and Historical Chronicle, and Poor Richard's Almanac. The Almanac was his first great success, making him known throughout the colonies and earning for him a substantial income for the next 40 years. Franklin's autobiography, a masterpiece of not only personal views and philosophies, but also a reflection of intellectual and religious thinking in the Age of Reason, expounds his philosophy of service to his fellow man. Addressed to his son, it afforded Franklin the freedom to boast of achievements and to explain many highly personal observations. Chief among these personal beliefs were his religious views. As a deist, he believed in a religion of morality and good deeds. In his autobiography, he explained his system for personal betterment. "I conceived the bold and arduous project of arriving at moral perfection. I made a little book with a page for each of the virtues. I ruled each page with red ink so as to have 7 columns. I crossed these columns with 13 red lines, marking the beginning of each line with the first letter of one of the virtues, on which line in its proper column I might mark by a little black spot every fault I found upon examination to have been committed respecting that virtue upon that day. Franklin eventually abandoned his system, having special difficulties with order and humility, but he considered the project a worthwhile endeavor. Disillusioned with organized religion and its failure to preach practical morality, Franklin seldom attended services, yet he retained a pew in the sanctuary of Christ Church for about 60 years, and he supported the church financially. One special project which he organized for the church was a lottery to pay for the construction of a steeple and for the chimes mounted inside. Franklin believed that the most acceptable service of God was the doing of good to men. Throughout his adult life, he sought to develop and promote inventions, projects, and programs which were useful and beneficial to his fellow citizens. Franklin's sympathies went beyond his neighbors in Philadelphia. He recognized the plight of the slaves and the Indians and was moved to action. He formed and became president of the Pennsylvania Society for Promoting the Abolition of Slavery. He was genuinely concerned about improving social, mental, and physical conditions for all people in America. Franklin relied on his pen and his printing press to spread his ideas and concerns. To get other people involved, he formed the Junto Club, a discussion group with whose support he organized a subscription library, established a union fire company, a fire insurance company, and a police force, succeeded in getting the streets paved in Philadelphia, and founded the University of Pennsylvania. As a scientist and inventor, he developed an electrical generator, a new kind of stove, bifocal reading glasses, and lightning rods. He experimented, proved, and documented each invention, and then suggested useful applications. He declined patents, saying that we should be glad of an opportunity to serve others by any invention of ours. He wrote more than 100 scientific papers in medicine, botany, hydraulics, physics, engineering, agronomy, chemistry, and ethnology. As a diplomat and public servant, Franklin served as the delegate from Pennsylvania to the Second Continental Congress in 1775. He had spent 16 years in England trying to establish peace between the Crown and the colonies. His efforts failed, and in biting satire he lashed out at the tyrannic British Empire in the essays, "Rules by which a great empire may be reduced to a small one," "The Sale of the Hessians," and "Exporting of Felons to the Colonies." Franklin's persuasive essays stirred the colonists to declare independence and to revolt against the authority of King George III. Franklin was not afraid of foreign kings and laws. In fearless indignation, he wrote pamphlets denouncing the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, the Tea Act, and the Punitive Acts. The call for independence rang clearly from the tower of Independence Hall. Franklin and fellow Americans Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson had attempted a reconciliation with England. Failing that, their alternative was to declare independence. Franklin's edicts, Paine's Common Sense, and Jefferson's Declaration of Independence stated the concerns and grievances of the colonies. With the fate of the colonies resting heavily upon the shoulders of the delegates meeting in this room in Independence Hall, Franklin and his colleagues supported Patrick Henry's sentiments, given at Williamsburg, "Give me liberty or give me death." Here they approved the drafting of a Declaration of Independence, calling for freedom from British domination, taxation without representation, and the quartering of British troops in the colonies. Thomas Jefferson, the principal writer of the Declaration, together with Franklin, Adams, Sherman, and Livingston, submitted this document, which stated, "In Congress, July 4, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for a people to advance from subordination, A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to change. The Declaration was signed by John Hancock, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and 53 others. It listed 27 charges against King George III. The Declaration was the ultimate cry for freedom and became the official call to arms. Unofficial skirmishes had been taking place for more than a year already. The first shots were fired in April of 1775 at the Old North Bridge in Concord, where the invading army stood and fired the shot heard round the world. The war raged for 6 years, ending in 1781 in Yorktown, Virginia. The Liberty Bell proclaimed liberty throughout the land. During the war, Franklin was the United States minister to France, where in 1778 he secured the French alliance, perhaps the greatest single factor in the ultimate victory of the American cause. Largely through the efforts of Franklin, Jefferson, and other skillful writers, the colonists rallied to the cause of freedom. Franklin died in 1790, age 84, and was buried in Christ Church burial ground. Just inside the metal fence is the grave of Benjamin Franklin. Other signers of the Declaration of Independence buried here are Francis Hopkinson, Dr. Benjamin Rush, Joseph Hughes, and George Ross. During the last 42 years of his life, instead of retiring as he had planned, Franklin had become one of the colony's most active supporters and most diplomatic statesmen. His funeral drew the largest crowd ever assembled for any event to this time in America. Buried beside his wife, Deborah, whom he had married in 1730 and who died in 1774, Franklin epitomized the American dream of independence, success, ambition, and loyalty to a cause. His legacy is a short autobiography and a major influence in securing a free and independent United States of America. Franklin's loyalty to America was perpetuated by his fellow patriot, Thomas Jefferson, 37 years younger than Franklin and equally zealous in public service. Like Franklin, he was an outstanding writer, statesman, inventor, and humanitarian. Unlike Franklin, he enjoyed wealth, education, and social prominence as a young man. Jefferson was an intelligent, gifted writer, continually recording his ideas and proposals and writing numerous letters. His writings are collected in this 20-volume edition. Jefferson was only 33 when he wrote and signed the Declaration of Independence. The committee's choice of Jefferson to write the Declaration was no arbitrary decision. He had already written several persuasive pamphlets, including A Summary View of the Rights of British America, an argument for the self-government of the colonies. Born in 1743 at Shadwell, his parents' plantation in Virginia, he enjoyed the luxuries of an early private education and graduated from William and Mary College at age 19 with a law degree. 10 years later, he designed and supervised the construction of his own mansion, Monticello, on a 5,000-acre inherited estate near Charlottesville. The peaceful setting suited his desire for an aristocratic retreat, and his marriage to Martha Whale Skelton, daughter of a prominent Virginia family, made his contentment complete. Fawn Brodie, a biographer, has written, his entire lifestyle in these first years of his marriage pointed to aristocracy. He lived with the grace and elegance of many British lords. His house slaves alone numbered 25. He loved fine wine, blooded horses, exotic orchards, a great library, and the leisure for reading philosophy, playing music, and recording the vagaries of the weather. Jefferson loved books and spent much time in his library. He accumulated a magnificent collection, but when the British burned the National Library in Washington in the War of 1812, He sold his 6,000 volumes to Congress at half price. He began immediately to purchase books for his own library again, and eventually matched the original number. Here, amid tall trees on a small mountain, Jefferson established his domain. To avoid an array of small buildings, he built rooms under the terraces. Captain Bacon, his business manager, explained, "Under the house and the terraces that surrounded it were his cisterns, ice houses, cellar, kitchen, and rooms for all sorts of purposes. His servants' rooms were on one side. Then there were rooms for vegetables, fruit, cider, wood, and every other purpose, including stables for his horses." It was a large house, 2 stories with 23 rooms and a basement with 12 rooms. Jefferson followed classic Roman architectural design with which he was well acquainted. Construction began in 1769, but was not completed when the Revolutionary War broke out. Following the war, Jefferson continued the construction of Monticello, where he hoped to settle into a routine of farming, horseback riding, and his favorite pastime, writing letters, which eventually numbered about 25,000. Monticello offered Jefferson opportunities to utilize some of his inventions, including this 7-day clock, powered by cannonballs hanging at the corners of the entrance room. Other designs and inventions of his include a quartet music stand, a revolving door with shelves, an octagonal filing table, and a moldboard plow. He was continually drawing, writing, designing, and experimenting. While Jefferson was enjoying his Monticello retreat after the war, his diplomatic genius was not forgotten by officials in Philadelphia. In 1784, he accepted a 5-year appointment as minister to France. Upon his return, he was appointed Secretary of State under George Washington, later became Vice President under John Adams, and then in 1800 was elected President of the United States. During his first term, the capital was moved from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C., where Jefferson became the first resident of the White House. 2 noteworthy accomplishments of Jefferson as president were his commissioning of Lewis and Clark to explore the Northwest Territory and his negotiating the purchase of the Louisiana Territory. The Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. is a reminder of Jefferson's dedicated service to the colonies. As a writer, he had produced the Declaration of Independence, a summary view of the rights of British America, the Constitution of Virginia, notes on the state of Virginia, the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and many other documents. His writings also involved areas of science, philosophy, sociology, and religion. His autobiography, written at age 77, was never finished because he could not tolerate self-praise. Halfway through the part he did complete, he complained, "I am already tired of talking about myself." His praise has come from succeeding generations who view his statue and pay tribute to his contributions to his country. As president, Jefferson stood firm and tall for freedom and equality. He promoted religious freedom and the abolition of slavery. But his heart was at Monticello while he was in Washington. He wrote to his daughter, "The scene passing here makes me pant to be away from it, to fly from the circle of cabal, intrigue, and hatred, to one where all is love and peace." So eager was he to return to Monticello upon completion of his second term as president that he left Washington in a storm, and when his carriage became mired in the mud, he rode 8 hours on horseback through blinding snow. Retirement was a reality at last. For his remaining 17 years, he enjoyed his little mountain retreat and his new personal title, the Sage of Monticello. He continued to pursue special projects, such as reforms in education, especially free elementary education for rich and poor, whites, and blacks, and college educations for all who were in easy circumstances. In a major action demonstrating his interest in higher education, in 1819, he founded the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. He staked out the building sites, designed the first buildings, and supervised their construction. When he could not be at the site, he watched the building progress through his telescope on the North Terrace at Monticello. When the university opened for classes in 1825, he was installed as the first rector. Although Jefferson's interests encompassed numerous areas, on his deathbed he was conscious of only one thing. He wished to die on the 4th of July. Exactly 50 years after signing the Declaration on July 4, 1826, he drew his last breath, fulfilling also his statement that all my wishes end where I hope my days will end, at Monticello. Jefferson had requested that his tombstone be engraved with 3 of his accomplishments: author of the Declaration of Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for religious freedom, and father of the University of Virginia. No mention was made of his being president. In the same year that Jefferson retired from his second term as president, far out on the western frontier, a child was born whose destiny it would be to hold the nation together, which Franklin and Jefferson had helped to establish. Abraham Lincoln, like Franklin and Jefferson, relied heavily upon the power of the written word to accomplish his purposes. In a brief autobiography he wrote, "I was born February 12, 1809, in Hardin County, Kentucky. My parents were both born in Virginia of undistinguished families." In his first 21 years, the Lincolns lived in 5 homes in Kentucky, Indiana, and Illinois, living in poverty and obscurity in log cabins. Although Lincoln had less than 1 year of formal schooling, he read every book he could borrow. His favorites included The Life of Washington, Aesop's Fables, Robinson Crusoe, Pilgrim's Progress, and the Bible. With great determination, he practiced writing and speaking clearly and logically, became a master of English prose, and eventually wrote letters, documents, and political papers, filling 7 volumes. His interest in political writings, business, and civic affairs prompted him to begin studying law at age 17. At age 25, he was elected to the Illinois Assembly. For the next 26 years, he served in political offices and as a lawyer on the 8th Judicial Circuit in Illinois, representing clients and holding court sessions in log cabin courthouses in 15 counties in Illinois, winning case after case through plain language and simple logic. In 1837, he moved to Springfield, Illinois, to practice law. In 1842, he married Mary Todd, and 2 years later, they purchased this home for $1,500. Here they lived in some measure of affluence, in contrast to the log cabins in which he grew up. This was the only home Lincoln ever owned. Here he received the news of his nomination to the presidency, and here also he was thronged by well-wishers and plagued by office-seekers. He hoped to retire in this home following his service as President of the United States. Inaugurated in 1861 in Washington, D.C., Lincoln was already immersed in the seething cauldron of the slavery issue. He had debated Douglas in regard to slavery in new states. As president, Lincoln's position was clear, as he stated it in a letter to Horace Greeley. "My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or to destroy slavery. I wish that all men everywhere could be free." The war had already begun at Fort Sumter when Lincoln became president. For the next 4 years, the nation was divided, and thousands died in a struggle that Lincoln sought desperately to end. But he would not compromise his position. Slavery must be abolished, and the Union must be saved. He said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free." The war raged on, its cause more sharply defined when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862, stating that after January 1863, all persons held as slaves shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. Lincoln wrote letter after letter to his generals, advising, questioning, always keeping in contact with the progress of the war. Finally, at Gettysburg, the Union troops won a decisive battle, and here Lincoln delivered his immortal Gettysburg Address. 15,000 people heard Edward Everett's 2-hour speech dedicating the